We're good.
Okay. I'm going to start recording you audio on my audio just to make sure I get them both because I've had trouble with not getting them. And I'm not going to record that. I'm going to.
So,
yes, sir.
So are you Guy or Guy?
You can call me either, sir.
If this was a Montreal
Mike told me
Canadiens,
if I'm going to block hockey, I better be Guy.
yeah,
So,
I would think so.
yes, Mike nailed me that on one of my shows, and that's actually one. If you're, I mean, I know you're in Alberta, and I don't know if you're a night owl or not, but when we have an earlier game, I do a pregame and intermission and postgame show. If you wanted to come on as a guest for one of those, we would gladly have you.
All right, let me know.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get this started. Mike, are you ready, Brock? Brock's real name is Rob, but he goes by Brock for the site, just to let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm local here in St. Louis too, so I got all
Oh,
kinds.
you're not in Hawaii?
I wish.
Hey,
Yeah, me too.
Before we get started, he's one of your biggest fans. Go ahead, tell him. Go ahead before we get started.
I was saved for the interview.
Okay.
Okay.
So here we go.
All right.
And in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And aloha! Welcome to the Bluenote Fan Report. I'm Guy, the Hawaii Blues fan, and I'm your host on the show that is by a fan, for the fans, and you got to know most definitely about you, the fans. And just as I do that, my camera decides to go funky, monkey on me. Okay, here we go. Well, this is going to be a fun show because I've got a very special guest for you. I'm going to be joined first by Brock. Brock Banner, the writer for me, is going to join us as we interview the original Golden Rocket. Yes, I'm talking about a man who played in 600, and I got to get this number right, 662 consecutive Blues games, scored 261 goals. Oh man, the numbers are going right. 518 points. He's fourth in goals scored, fourth in points, ninth in games played. He is second overall in consecutive games, NHL all time. This is none other than the first superstar of St. Louis hockey, the Iron Man. Please give a huge Bluenote Fan Report welcome to Mr. Garry Unger.
Hi, Guy.
Hey, sir, how are you?
And Brock, how are you doing?
Doing great, sir. Doing great. Honored to have you on the show.
Thanks.
Absolute pleasure and an honor to have you, Garry. This is, like you can see, I'm beaming. So the way I normally do this is I start out and I ask about where you grew up and how you got into hockey. How did hockey become a love for you?
Well, I grew up, I was born in Edmonton, Alberta. My dad was in the Army, so we lived in an Army camp, and it was called PMQs, Permanent Married Quarters. And so all the kids were all packed into one area. And back then, it got cold first part of October. I remember going to Halloween when it was 30 below. And we would just put a ski jacket on and our toques and all our stuff and throw a sheet over our head and go as a ghost, because you couldn't dress up in anything for Halloween because it was too cold. But everything was outside. I never played indoors until I was 14 years old. My dad made a rink out the back of our place, and they didn't put a lot of junk on the road, and there wasn't a lot of traffic where we lived. So we could skate on the road. We could play on the road in our boots. Our games were outside when we weren't, our games were on the road when we weren't at the rink. So pretty well all winter, that's all we did. I learned to skate when I was about 3. My dad was an athlete, played on the Army hockey team. He joined the Army when he was young. My dad was born in Russia. and moved over to Canada, met my wife or his wife and my mom in Red Deer, Alberta, when he was in the Army, and always had a love for hockey himself. And I came home one day and there was a pair of white skates, not figure skates. They were just girl skates with boys' blades on them. And we painted them black. And that was my first pair of skates. So when I would come home from school, we would play hockey on the road with the kids until it got dark. And then we'd maybe run in the backyard and have a little bit of time to skate because we had a light out at the back. And that's how I started skating. The rink, not the rink, but the place that as I grew up and got older, across the street was a rendering plant for, I guess, horses and cows and whatever. And there was a big pond in the middle of the field. Half of it was blood and half of it was ice. And we skated out there when we could. There was a rink at the school that had some boards. What they do is the communities had a rink with boards around them for the guys to play hockey. And then the field was all ice. So anybody that wanted to come and skate with their girlfriends, or the girls were skating out there, they didn't want to play in the hockey game, they'd be out in the field and the guys would be on the hockey rink. So how you learned to stick handle was there was probably 25 guys on each team. And if you didn't learn how to stick handle, you never touched the puck. So that was how you learned. So that was kind of my growing up years in Edmonton. And I don't want to go too long with one question, but I moved to, my dad was posted, what they call posted. I know you were a vet.
Yes, sir.
And
We both are,
you were overseas and protecting our country, which I, give you credit for that. That's a huge job to take care of the United States of America. So
thank you, sir.
Anyhow, when I think I was about 11, my dad got posted to Calgary. So we moved down to the Army camp in Calgary. And again, everything was outside. The Army camp was in South Calgary. So the community center that I went to was called South Calgary Community Center. And by that time I was starting to be a pretty okay player. And he called me one day and he said, listen, they're having a tryout for all the kids your age. Calgary's a pretty big city. And every community had their own little team, which was community teams. But they were going to there was no AA and AAA and all that stuff, but there was going to make one A team at each age level. And that group of 20 kids or 16 kids or how many guys were on that particular team, they would play against the kids in the B division of the next age group. So when I was 11, I was playing against guys 13 and 14. Yeah. And the guys 13 and 14 were playing against guys 16 and 17. So that's how we got better, because we played against older kids all the time, if you made the team.
Yeah.
So they had a tryout. It was Saturday morning. I remember going down to it, and there was probably 400 kids there, my age, probably 8, 9, 10, 11, that age group. I was small for my age. I hadn't grown yet. And they just skated everybody around, and then they took all the little guys and they brought them over into the corner and they cut them. So I was with the little guys and I got cut, but there was so many guys on the ice. They didn't know who was there and who wasn't. So I just skated around back and got in the line again. And now I was playing again. So then they'd do the same thing about 5 minutes later and they cut me again. And this happened 4 times. So now we were down to 30 guys and I was still with the group. I was an okay skater, so I was kind of fitting in. And then they had to get down to, I think, 23 guys or something. So that's when they went to the board, and, you know, they had their name up on the sheet, and my name wasn't on it. So that was the 5th time that I got cut, but there was no way that I could get back onto the team because they had the list. So it was kind of a defining moment for me as a young kid, because my buddies had all made the team. Their names were on the team. So I had to make a choice. I said, you know, my dad said, well, what do you want to do? You know, you're quitting hockey, or you didn't make the best team. What are you going to do? And I said, well, if I didn't make this team, I guess there's another team over there. I can play for the community. You know, I love hockey, and what's the difference? It's the same game. So I went over and played community hockey. This team started their season. And in November, my dad came to me after school, and he said, listen, this team that you got cut from 5 times, they got a couple of injuries, and they're interested in maybe you coming and playing for the weekend. So I said, sure. We don't have any games. So I went in on the weekend, and most of the guys were quite a bit bigger than I was, especially the guys we were playing against, because they were Bantam B players. So they were, 13, 14 years old. So I went in on the Saturday, and I got a hat trick in the first game, and I got 2 or 3 goals in the second game. So all of a sudden on Monday, I'm playing on the team that I got cut 5 times from, and that's my team.
So
that's how I made the team.
I gotta ask, how did you learn that shot of yours? I mean, because your shot was just, I mean, it was one of the best in the league for a long time.
I wish I knew. I wish I could teach it.
Yeah.
I have a little grandson that I'm working with now with 9-year-old kids, and I've been teaching high school kids, and we had a hockey school until the pandemic broke in Banff Hockey Academy in Banff, Alberta. But a lot of the stuff that I did was just natural. And I don't know. I can't say it was just natural, because I would watch at that time. Hockey Night in Canada was the only game you could watch on TV on Saturday night. It came on at 8 o'clock. It was either the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we were allowed to stay up later on Saturday night, and I'd watch probably half of the first period. And then the house we lived in, we had a basement with cement walls. And I couldn't stand watching any more of the game. I'd go downstairs and shoot pucks. So we had egg crates, and we had stuff set up so that I could shoot and hit things. But I don't remember ever doing anything different than the other kids did. But it was just one of those things that came natural to me.
Well, I mean, your shot was amazing. I'll let Brock go now.
It's a real honor for me to talk to you, because again, I was born right about when the team was created here in St. Louis, and I was telling Guy that the very first sports celebrity superstar that I remember as a young kid was Garry Unger. I mean, you're on all the posters, you're all over the place, and it's the 70s in St. Louis was such an interesting time, because all the sports teams were going. I mean, the people were going out, the concert scene. So what was it like to be in St. Louis in that 70s and be a young kid and be the center of attention?
It was like living a rock star life. It was like living a dream. Wow. I mean, when I every kid in Canada, first of all, wants to play in the NHL. And like I tell the kids, it's one thing to make the team. It's another thing to stay. So there's a lot of guys that get to the point where they're good enough to play, and they play a little bit, and then they think they've arrived, and they think they don't have to work as hard as they did before, and all of a sudden it goes away. So it was something that I really wanted to do. I wanted to be a hockey player, and I'll tell you a little story about, again, going back to Calgary. I was probably at this time, I had to be 16 because I had my motorcycle. I drove a scooter. I had a Vespa 125 that I drove. We were allowed to have a a 125 or under when when you were 14 in Alberta. And I had a paper route. I delivered papers, the Calgary Herald, to all the Army camp. And so I used my scooter in the wintertime and slid around and did my papers. And Gordie Howe was working with a company called Eaton's, which is a big department store in Canada. I think it's still in Canada. Anyhow, he worked for them. So one day I came home and my buddies all said, "Hey, Gordie Howe's down signing autographs at Eaton's in the sports department at Eaton's." I said, "Well, let's go down and see him." So we all went down, and I stood back. The line was outside the door. I mean, there was hundreds and hundreds of kids, and I stood back and I just watched them. And kids were getting autographs and autographs. I stood there for 2 or 3 hours, and then finally the line was getting down. And I thought, okay, I'll jump in line here. I won't have to wait as long. And I jumped in line, and there was, 10 kids in front of me. And I got up to where he was signing autographs, and I was embarrassed to talk to him, and I left, and I never got his autograph.
Oh.
And I guess I said I was 16 then. So in between time, I went to London to play junior hockey, and then I ended up going to Toronto and hacking around for a little bit in Toronto. I didn't play much in Toronto. And then all of a sudden I get involved in a trade to the Detroit Red Wings. So I jump on a plane with Frank Mahovlich and Pete Stemkowski and who else was there that time? Now the three of us, and then Carl Brewer was involved in the trade as well, but he met us. So we met the team in New York. So I go to Madison Square Gardens, and the chalkboard is up there. We didn't have these fancy things that they write on nowadays, but the chalkboard was up there. And I'm playing center between Frank Mahovlich and Gordie Howe. Gordie Howe is my winger. So now I get to say, "Hi, Gordie, how you doing?" I was afraid to talk to you 2 years ago, and now I'm on the ice with you. So that was a pretty exciting time for me.
Sure.
There wasn't.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but that had to be a great
No.
time in the NHL, because that was right when the NHL expanded from the 6 to the 12 teams. So all of a sudden you have this influx of guys who have just been wanting to make it. And I gotta think that, the fight to be there was incredible.
Well, the odds of making it were pretty slim, especially when there were 6 teams.
Mm-hmm.
I played a few games when there were 6 teams, but back then, if you were a rookie, you didn't get much ice time. Like when I was in Toronto, I think they've got me down, and I'm not really a stats guy, but they've got me down for 15 games or something playing in Toronto. And I might have got 10 shifts altogether. I scored 1 goal in Toronto. A bunch of guys got hurt, and I didn't get to. I got to play a little bit, but most of the time as a rookie, you sat on the bench and watched. So the break for me was the fact that when I got traded to Detroit, they were mathematically out of the playoffs. Had they been fighting for a playoff spot, probably a 20-year-old kid coming into Detroit wouldn't have got thrown in the lineup between Frank Mahovlich and Gordie Howe, because they'd been needing these points. But I guess they wanted to see what I was and whether I was worth trading for. And I got to play the last 15 games of the season with Detroit, regular shift, never missed a shift with those guys, and ended up getting 15 points in that particular time. So that set me up for the next year. I wore number 16 when I wore 17 in Toronto, and then they gave me 16 when I got traded to Detroit, because back then numbers were pretty important. Gordie Howe was number 9. So if it was like somebody wearing 99, you're not going to see anybody wearing 99 because it was a special number. Yeah. So number 7 was a special number. 9 was a special number, and they had these all for the veteran guys. So when I came to training camp the next year in Detroit, I came into the dressing room and my sweater was hanging up and they had given me number 7. So I knew that they had high hopes of me making the team and being with the team, because there was a pile of rookies as well in Detroit.
Yeah, that's got to be. I mean, because back then single digits meant something. If you were a single digit, you were on the team. Period.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
That was
Yeah.
That was a thing, and that actually comes from baseball, because the original numbers were based on your position numbers. And,
Yeah.
the single digit numbers, Babe Ruth 3, all that. But so I could imagine you walking into that room with Gordie Howe and his famous 9, and you're being 2 lockers over in number 7.
Yeah. Alex Del Vecchio, number 10, was right there as well. Frank Mahovlich was number 27, but he had that the whole time he was with Toronto. And the whole dressing room, Bobby Bond was another player that ended up coming to Detroit, that played in Toronto as well. And I got to play that era of guys. They were amazing guys. They totally took care of me. I was part of the team. Rookies were part of the team, and it was a pretty exciting experience for me to end up in Detroit, first of all. Second of all, to be allowed to play in the NHL, and then to be able to compete. I didn't know whether I could compete, and I learned out fairly quickly. If I didn't, I wouldn't be playing long.
There is a famous story. I called you the original Golden Rocket, because you kind of were. I mean, some people called say Bobby Hull was the Golden Jet, but you were, to my eyes, for the Blues, the first Golden Rocket. You had very long blonde hair, and in Detroit, the rumor is that you got traded because you refused to cut your hair.
Okay, well, it's a little bit more of a technical story than that, but back then, guys had what we called in Canada, I think you call them crew cuts in the States. In Canada, we called them brush cuts. So most athletes had brush cuts, and I did too. When I played junior hockey, my hair was short, and we all looked the same. The year that I played my first year in Detroit with short hair and normal hair, I guess. And at the end of the season, I went to Greece with my girlfriend, who is my wife still today. Anyhow, we went to Greece. At that time, it was the hippie era, and all the guys that I was hanging around with on the beach, and everybody had long hair. So I, over the summer, let my hair grow long, and it turned blonde from the sun and being on the Greek islands and that type of thing. So when I came back to training camp, I thought, geez, I really kind of like my hair. I don't think I'm going to get a cut this year. Well, in the meantime, they'd made a coaching change, and they brought a guy in from Cornell University. His name was Ned Harkness. Been very successful at a college level. They brought him in, and we were getting ready to go to training camp. Guys hadn't really met him yet. I had just come in a few days before training camp. I had come in from overseas and, got myself ready, and I'm going to meet the guys for training camp. Training camp was Monday morning. Back then, training camp was 6 weeks long. Now they have 3 days. If you're not in top shape when you go to training camp, you're not going to make the team, because everybody is in top shape. I'll get into it a little bit later, but when I went to Blues training camp, Bobby Plager used to wear a garbage bag over top of underneath his equipment, so he could sweat and lose 15 pounds while training camp was going on. So guys didn't come in game conditions. So anyhow, the year before, I had gone to training camp with Detroit, and I was in top shape when I went to training camp. I spent the summer riding my bikes and climbing mountains and riding horses. And, you know, I didn't do much gym stuff. I lifted a little bit, but when I came to camp, I was in fairly good shape. So we went into this first training camp before this new coach came in. I think, who was the coach there? Bill Gadsby. Bill Gadsby was the coach. So we go into training camp and we're doing line, you know, back and forth doing lines without any pucks. So I'm going as hard as I can back and forth. I'm going to be first. I'm going to be first in line. Nobody's going to pass me. So I'm up and down, back and forth. And about 3 shifts in, 3 up and downs, back and forth, Alex Del Vecchio, the captain of the team, he skates over to me and he says, stay with the pack. And I said, well, if I stay with the pack, we're all going to be going together. He says, yeah, that's what we want. Because those guys weren't in great shape and they didn't want anybody way ahead of them or way back. So I spent the whole training camp trying to stay with the pack. But about 2 days in, I guess, I get a call from Lefty Wilson, the trainer. He's holding my jersey and he says, the coach wants to see you. I said, okay. So I go in and see the coach and he throws my jersey down on the counter or on his desk. And he says, there's not an ounce of sweat on this thing. You know, we just skated for 2 hours and aren't you sweating? And I said, well, Alex told me to stay with the pack. So I'm just kind of having a leisurely skate out there. And he said, well, you better get going. So I never wore underwear underneath my shirt. I just wore my equipment and I didn't wear a t-shirt. So at that point, I started dumping water on myself so that my shirt was wet, so that when I turned it into the trainer, I had a bunch of water on my shirt. So that training camp, I mean, that 6 weeks of training camp was the best holiday I've ever been on, because we'd skate in the morning, we'd go for lunch. These guys played golf in the afternoon, then we'd go for supper, and then we'd skate in the morning again. So I was just kind of floating along, just having a great time. So when this next training camp came up, I thought, well, I guess I'll get in shape during training camp. So I came in a few days before camp was going to start, and I was living with a guy named Jerry Hart. He was my roommate, and Pete Stemkowski was there as well. And I had bought 11 acres of land out by the airport in Detroit. Mm-hmm. And it was a horse place, boarding horses. A friend of mine's buddy had 22 acres and I had 22 acres. It wasn't very big, but we had some horses out there. So on the Sunday before the game or the practice on Monday, before training camp started, Jerry and I went out to ride some horses. When I got out to the ranch, there was a doctor out there that bought this really fancy horse, and nobody could ride this horse. It was in a corral. We were going to go for a trail ride. This horse was in a corral, and we came out, and I'm walking around, and this doctor came over to me and he says, think you can ride that horse? And I said, what's wrong with it? He said, well, I bought it. Nobody can ride it. I said, well, I can ride it. So I jumped on this horse in the corral. He bucked and jumped and bounced around and calmed down. So we're now ready to go on a trail ride. And this doctor says, oh, you got to take my horse. You got to ride the horse. He needs some time with somebody riding him. So I said, well, okay. So now he was outside the corral and we had about 10, 12 people. So I stayed at the back of the group and I'm holding this horse back with the reins. I mean, he wants to go. So we're going through the fields and now we're going through the trees, and we come through the trees and we come to a great big open field as we come out of the trees. Well, the other horses were already out into the field. This horse, once he saw daylight, I had his reins tight. I had his neck back and he reared his neck up. I yanked on the reins and the reins broke. And this thing took off 100 miles an hour. So he's going across the field, and I'm trying to figure out a place to jump off, but he's really going. So I figure, okay, he's going to hit the trees down the far side. He's going to slow down. I'll jump off and let him go. He got to the trees and he never even slowed down. So now I'm looking for a place to jump off. I jumped off. As he turned left, I jumped off right, and he flipped me in the air, and I hit a tree about halfway up in the side of my back. So if I had hit my spine, I probably wouldn't have been playing hockey, but it was just on the side. I broke a couple of couple of bones on the side of my back, and but it was like an injury where it's like when you break your toe, you can't do anything with it other than let it heal. Yeah. So now everybody goes to training camp. I'm in the hospital, and now I'm in a wheelchair. So I spent the whole training camp in a wheelchair doing exercises and trying to get my back organized. Now they were a month into the training camp, and Sid Abel called me and said, you probably should go down and meet the coach. I hadn't even skated yet. I hadn't skated since the year before. So I went down to training camp. It was in Port Huron, met the guys, and that's when I first met Ned Harkness. So I went and met the guys in the dressing room, and Ned came to me and he said, do you want to go for lunch? I was walking with a cane. I was now up to a cane. I had crutches. I was in a wheelchair. I was in crutches, and then I had a cane. So we go for lunch, and I've got this cane, and I'm sitting down, and he's drawn something on the napkin. And he never once asked me how my back was. He was drawing on the napkin how he wanted my haircut, because this is when I'm just coming back from Greece and I got long blonde hair. And he didn't care whether I had a bad back or what I was doing. He wanted my hair cut a certain way. Wow. Anyhow, Stemmer came to me after that, and he said, listen, this guy, he made me go get my hair cut 4 times. He says, I brought my hair back in an envelope to show him I got my hair cut. So anyhow, that's how the hair thing started. So I would get it a little bit, and he'd say, no, you need it more and more and more. But I never did really get to that point. But here's what happened. I never played a day in training camp. And then I started the season. By that time, my back was kind of healed. I was totally out of shape because all I'd been doing is laying around. I started the shift. I started the first game in Detroit. Guy took a shot from the point. I was skating in front of the net, shot from the point. It hit me in the rear end and went in the net. So I scored the first goal of the season. But besides that, I was so out of shape that now my game wasn't where it needed to be. And the team wasn't getting along with Ned. They'd already spent 6 weeks with him in training camp, and nobody liked the guy. And we were coming back with all these stories about Alex Del Vecchio couldn't smoke cigars, and you weren't allowed to do this, and you weren't allowed to do that. And he was treating the guys like college kids. So it got to the point where everybody that was on the team was kind of against Ned, and we were losing games left and right. And again, I hadn't had a very good start. I gotta see is this battery low on here?
I'm not sure why we lost your camera there, Gary.
I'm gonna plug this in again.
Okay.
See if that makes any difference. Are we back?
Yep.
Okay.
And,
So what happened? We were in a pretty bad slump. Guys were, you try not to say I'm not playing for this coach, but that's what was happening. And besides me not playing, I wasn't in condition to play. So I forget what I usually had at least 22 or 3 goals by Christmas time. It was Christmas time, and I think I only had 10 goals maybe. So now we go into Toronto Maple Leaf Gardens, Montreal, or Toronto Hockey Night in Canada. We're on a road trip to Buffalo. We go into Toronto. First period, it's 6-0 for the Leafs on Hockey Night in Canada. Second period, I think it was 9-0. The game ended up 13-0 for Toronto. So obviously there was something wrong with our hockey team. I'd kind of got myself back in shape again here now, but we jumped on the bus. We were going to Buffalo. We jumped on the bus. When we got off the bus in Buffalo, I was exhausted because Gordie and Frank and some of the older guys didn't want to play in Toronto anymore. You know, they didn't want to play in that game. So that I was playing every second shift. And we didn't get into Toronto. It had to be 2:30 in the morning. I was exhausted, wanted to go to sleep. I was heading into the hotel, and a guy named Dale Rolfe grabbed me by the shirt. And he said, "Throw your bag into the lobby. We're going over to Sinatra's." So we went over to Sinatra's, which is a little bar in Buffalo that was open most of the night. And the guys all sat at the bar. I never drank. So I'm drinking Coke and eating chicken wings. And these guys are throwing back beer. And nobody's talking. There's no talking. There's no nothing. Guys were just really upset. So now it's like 4:00 in the morning, and I can't wait to get back to the hotel room. So everybody says, "Okay, let's go back. We're going to Gordie's room to have a meeting." So we go back to Gordie's room, and it was one of those little hotels rooms that you get 20, 22 hockey guys in the room. There's not much room. Yeah. So we're all sitting around on the bed and everywhere, and there were probably 6 of us were rookies in the room. So we're rookies, even though we're rookies, we're just happy to be playing. We don't want to ruffle any feathers. I'm not going to say I don't want to play for this coach. Anyhow, Bruce McGregor was our player rep. Frank Mahovlich was with him. And they brought out this piece of paper, and they said, "Listen, we want everybody in the team to sign this piece of paper saying they're not going to play for this guy anymore." So Gordie said, hold it. He says, "I've been here for 15, 18 years. I better give the owner a call and tell him what's going on." So Gordie got on the phone with Bruce Norris, and he said, "Listen, there's a revolt going on here, and the guys don't want to play for this guy." And Bruce Norris said, "Don't worry about it, Garry. We'll get it straightened around. Or Gordie, we'll get it straightened around. You can't cancel a game." So at that point, Bruce McGregor called Al Eagleson, who was the head of the Players Association, and he told him the same thing. He said, "We're not playing in Buffalo tomorrow night if this guy's coaching." So they calmed everything down. Al Eagleson jumped in his car and drove to Buffalo. We had a meeting in the morning. Gordie assured us, and the owner assured us that Ned was on his way out, and we played the game. So I don't remember what the score was, or I don't remember whether we won or lost. It was kind of a fog. But I do remember flying back into Detroit early in the morning, and the little newspaper deals where you put your money in and get the newspaper out. You could see the headlines: Ned Harkness fired as general manager, but you couldn't see what was under it. You couldn't see under the headline. So when you put your money in and pull the thing down, it said Ned Harkness fired as general manager, or fired as coach. Now he's the general manager. So he had this list with all our signatures on it. So that's when he started trading guys. Yeah. Now, if I'd have been healthy and hadn't hurt myself on that horse, and I had, 35 goals as opposed to 13 from what I should have had, he would have had a tougher time trading me than he did. But all of a sudden I'm in a situation where every town I go in, somebody's saying, "We're going to trade for you." So about 2 weeks before I went to Detroit, or before I went to St. Louis, Ned called me in the office, and I thought, this is it. He's going to tell me where I'm traded to. And he sat me down and he said, "Listen," he said, "Alex Delvecchio is going to be retiring here before long. And as long as I'm here, you're going to be my next captain. You'll be my next captain. We're going to build the team around you. I said, oh, that's great. I love Detroit. I want to stay here. I want to play here. 2 weeks later, that's when the trade was made in St. Louis.
Oh, that had
So that's how I ended up in St. Louis.
that had to hurt a little bit. That had to sting.
Well, I really like Detroit. I mean, nobody likes to be traded. Nobody likes to be, they say to you, well, we don't want you anymore.
Yeah.
But then you've got a defining moment, and are you going to pack it in, or are you going to pull yourself up by the bootstraps when you're in some kind of a foxhole where you were over in the Middle East, Guy? There's things that happen in your life that you don't like, and because of my upbringing with my parents and the way my dad brought me up, I wasn't a quitter. So I decided that St. Louis was the next place I was going to play, and that's where I went.
Well, go to St. Louis and play. You did. You had an amazing career while you were in St. Louis. And you brought up something earlier, and everyone knows we just lost Bobby last week, a week ago tomorrow, or a week ago the day after we filmed this, or the day, whatever.
A week ago.
I know you've told some stories of Bobby and that, and you just told the one about training camp. What are some other things that you can really go in and tell us about what the Plager brothers were like?
Well, I didn't have an easy time when I first came to Detroit, or when I was traded from Detroit to St. Louis, because, Red Berenson was the leader of the team. Red and Barkley, Noel Picard, those guys had all knew each other for junior, as they grew up. And Red, it was a shock to everybody, I think, that Red was traded as well, because he was the leading goal scorer on the team and all that stuff. So here comes this young kid that nobody really had heard of. I'm sure that not many of the fans knew who I was. Maybe a few of the hockey people had known, because I'd scored the year before I got traded, the year I went to Greece. I had scored 42 goals that year, and it was second in the league. Excuse me. But I had a little bit different. They were very, very intense. I was an intense guy when the game was going on, but I was a different personality than they were. They were more old school. I was a little more laid back, and that didn't mean that I didn't want to win just as bad as they did, but they wanted me to show that a little bit more. So in practice, I was joking around and fiddling with the puck and doing stupid stuff as a kid does. And there was times when, we'd have a scrimmage, and I'd have to go at it with Bark and Bob, and I'd already fought Bob and Noel when I was in Detroit. The first time I met Bob was in the front of the net in the arena when I was playing with Detroit, and a brawl broke out, and Bobby and I were in front of the net, and we dropped our gloves. I dropped my stick. My stick happened to be behind me. There was players all over the place. If you were sitting in the building, you would have thought this guy hit me with the hardest punch he's ever hit in his life. As he came through with a right hand shot, my head was right there. I leaned back and I stepped on my hockey stick. So as the punch came through, it just got to the end of my nose, where it just touched my nose, and I flipped back because I flipped off my hockey stick, and it looked like he knocked me cold. But the punch never even touched me. So I jumped up and we scrambled around for a while. And that's when I first met Bobby. Did the same thing with Noel Picard. Noel Picard was whacking me in front of the net and cross-checking me. I'm playing center, so I'm in the slot area, and they're just abusing me. And I'm thinking to myself, geez, this guy's big, and I'm going to have to play 20 years against this guy. I said, if I let this go on, I'm going to be beat to whatever. So this happened in front of the net. The puck came out of the zone. I skated out to the blue line. And then I said, okay, this is probably the time. So I turned around, dropped my gloves, stood on the blue line, and Noel was coming out of the zone. And I said, okay, let's go. So I remember him taking a shot as well. And I remember his fist came by my head, and his fist was as big as my head. If he'd have hit me, I'd have been knocked into tomorrow. So I scuffled around with him, and that's before I got traded there. So these guys knew that I wasn't going to back down. One of the things that I learned in junior was to protect myself. And I learned how to fight because I was the goal scorer on the team, and they were always trying to get me out of the lineup. So one of the things I could do, I was a skinny little kid playing hockey that could fight, but I didn't look like a fighter. So anyhow, we went at it in practice and all that stuff until they realized, my dedication to the game, and we became friends, and we went for lunch all the time and that type of thing. So we became real good friends.
One of Bobby's favorite pranks, and I love hearing about this, is when you fell asleep on the plane.
Well, you didn't want to do that. Yeah, we traveled normal planes. We didn't have our own plane, so we usually sat at the back of the plane, all the team guys, and the passengers sat up at the front, and the stewardess and everybody knew who we were, so they gave us a little bit of leeway. And if you happened to fall asleep on the plane, Bobby would grab a shaving cream, a bottle of shaving cream, and he'd take the shaving cream and he'd put it on the top of his head, or whoever was sleeping. And then they'd put a cherry on top of the shaving cream. It looked like a sundae sitting on top of your head. And then they'd tickle the guy with a feather or something. So he'd whack himself in the head and the shaving cream would go all over the place. Or he'd come by and cut your tie off. I mean, lots of times guys were walking off the plane and they only had just a piece of their tie there. Or if they take their shoes off, guys were crawling under the seats and stealing your shoes. So they were walking off the plane with no shoes. So there was all these things that were going on the plane. In the lobby of, while we were waiting for the plane in the airport, if you were reading the paper, somebody would come along, sneak in behind you, and light the paper on fire, and everybody would be yelling, "Hot news, hot news!" And the paper would blow up like a flash. You couldn't do that nowadays. I mean, we'd all been kicked out of the airports and we couldn't fly and all that stuff. They used to take a fishing line and put a $20 bill attached to it, and they'd throw it out in the middle of the concourse where the people were walking down going to their next plane. You couldn't see the fishing line on this $20 bill, and some guy would see the $20 bill and he'd reach down to get it and they'd pull it, and this $20 bill was going down the middle of the aisle there, and the guy was going after this $20 bill, and then everybody would roar. All the guys would start laughing, and then the guy would know what was going on. So the other thing was that this is the first one that I remember with Bobby. In the dressing room, I was one of the first guys in the NHL to use white tape. I don't know why. I didn't like black tape. They call it Gordie Howe tape. So what they did with black tape is they taped their stick with black tape, and then they put in a sock, they put baby powder, and they tied a skate lace around it, and they tied the baby powder to the, somewhere where it was hanging up. And then when you taped your stick, this black tape was a little bit sticky, so you'd tap your stick with baby powder, and it would kind of turn your stick a little bit white, but it would take the stickiness away from the tape. Mm-hmm. So if they were doing interviews in between periods or something, some guy would come in, like Panger would come in with a beautiful looking black suit on. He's going to do an interview. He wants to make sure that he's got his guys organized for the interview. And Bobby would sneak over and grab this sock with baby powder in it. And all of a sudden, whack, and a black suit with white baby powder on it was all over the place. So we all also used cotton batting to put in our jock straps so we didn't get jock itch. Mm-hmm. So then then Barker or one of the guys would run over with this cotton batten and say, here, this will take it off. This will take the baby powder off. And he'd try and wipe the baby powder off. And now he had cotton batten and baby powder all piled into his suit. And he would definitely have to go and change. So that was one of the first things that happened in the dressing room while I was there with Bobby.
You go, Brock, I'll let you go now because
I mean,
hold it in.
You tell these stories, and again, with the passing of Bobby Plager, we've heard so many alumni coming out and telling just really great humorous stories. How do you think you would do in today's NHL as a player? Do you think your style would be suited to the way the game's played right now instead of this rough and tumble way of the years past?
Well, I'd be really slow.
Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Can these guys skate today? They can fly. No, every era is different, and it's hard to say. It's like when people ask me, I played with Gordie Howe and I played with Gretzky, and I played against Bobby Orr. It was a different era. When I played with Gordie, he was 34, 32 years old, 33, 34. Gretzky was 21. It was a different offensive type of a game. And you can't really put them in a box. They were all wonderful players, great players. I never say this guy was better than that guy. I mean, there was a group of guys that were at the top. Bobby Orr was one of them. Gretz was one of them. Mario Lemieux. I mean, you can go down the list of all the different guys that went through the league. But the style of game is so different nowadays. Part of my training as a kid, especially as a smaller kid, playing against bigger guys, was the fact that I needed to learn how to fight, but I also needed how to learn how to use my stick, not to whack guys on the head, even though that did happen once in a while, but to protect myself. I had to protect myself with the stick. So that our talk in our age was that if anybody was going to come and hit me, they would have to come through my lumbar. My stick was, Gordie Howe said to me one time, he was talking with his stick guy, and I'm sitting next to him in the dressing room, and he's talking to this guy, and he says, listen, he says, I don't want, when you're making my sticks, we used to get a dozen sticks made with our names on them, and they were custom made sticks. And they'd bring in the dozen sticks and you'd try them and maybe keep 7 or 8 of them. And then the other 4 would go back. Gordie said to this guy, I want my sticks made from the middle of the tree. I don't want any of my wood from the outside of the tree, because when I hit somebody with my stick, I don't want it to break. I want the toughest wood they can possibly get. So we learned how to use our sticks and protect ourselves and to hook and hold and do all those things. And when I'm watching the game now and the penalties that they're giving out, I don't know whether I would have not been out of the penalty box, or any of the guys that played in our era would have been in the penalty box. So it was a different style of game, a different type of game. The speed of the game was quicker. I think the guys have a lot more advantage as far as personal trainers and being working out, in the gym in the summertime, and conditioning and all the different nutrition stuff that they have. There was times when I first was with Detroit, we weren't allowed to drink water. They wouldn't let us drink water while we played because they said it would slow you down. So none of that stuff was information yet. It didn't come in until I was actually, probably the mid 70s. It was starting to come in, but there's so much more that you have available to you as a player to be that finely tuned athlete at top condition all the time. And I think that would be the difference between if we were able to have that stuff. I think a lot of us probably could have played, but maybe I would have never got a goal.
Yeah, I don't think the chicken wings are on the menu. The chicken wings aren't really on the menu today.
Well, I want to bring, you played with the Blues for, I think it was 9 or 10 years. Really, just a fantastic career with the Blues. But you played with almost, I think, 5 of the numbers that are in the rafters. If I remember correctly, I know you played with Bob Gessoff. I know you played with both Bob and Barclay. I think you played with Brian and Bernie. Am I correct, or did you miss them?
Yeah, the first year, and I couldn't figure it out in training camp what they were doing. One of the things that was frustrating for me was every year, starting from when I first got there until Brian, until Bernie, Wayne Babich, another guy was Rick Bourbonnais. He played on a line with Bernie and Sutsy back then. Every guy that we drafted, every year we draft 2 or 3 players to come in to play on our team, and none of them, very seldom, would make it, or they would make it, but we wanted them to make a difference on the team. You had to give them a time to get better, and it's honest to be able to do that. But we wanted help. We were playing in a pretty good hockey league, and we were struggling we were putting 1.5, 2 lines together, and we weren't really strong maybe on our 3rd line, or we needed a better checking line, or whatever it was. So it was getting a little bit frustrating because we were having a tough time competing. And even when they had their good teams, when they ended up playing Montreal in the playoffs, there was still a gap between the guys that were playing in the expansion teams and the guys in the original 6.
Yeah.
So when Bernie and Sutsy came into training camp, I thought to myself, this is great. We've got some more players that are going to make us a better team. And they sent these guys to Salt Lake City. I think it was Salt Lake City that they were playing in. So my numbers, it could have been February, it could have been January, somewhere like that. They brought all 3 of these, and at that point, that's when Rick Bourbonnais was playing with Bernie and Brian. They brought all 3 of these guys up from training camp, or from the minors, and they finished the season with the Blues and finished strong. And I remember Brian Sutter's from a place called Sylvan Lake, Alberta, which is outside of Calgary. And I remember going to his place in the summertime. I think they had a little hockey school or something. And I remember, just like yesterday, sitting down in the basement with him, and he's sitting with me and he's saying, geez, he says, I'm getting ready for training camp, and I'm just really worried that I'm not going to make the team this year. And I said, Brian, the way you and Bernie and Rick played at the end of the season, and I knew that Babich was coming up. I said, that's the least thing that you need to be worried about. I said, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be playing on the Blues, and you're going to be a great player. And that's what happened.
Yeah, I want to talk, this is kind of a dark period, and we've talked about it offline, so I know it's okay. But I want to talk a little bit about Bob Gessoff. It happened, I don't remember the exact year, but it did happen.
77.
Right, Memorial Day of 77. And it happened at your farm just outside of Imperial, Missouri, if I remember correctly. And I know you call that a defining moment in your life. So I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just going to let you kind of talk about that.
Well, when I was growing up, one of the things I wanted to be a hockey player or a cowboy. I loved horses. My grandfather had a farm up in Grand Prairie, Alberta, and I would go there every summer and ride horses and cows and whatever you could ride on, pigs. And we just that was a love of my own. Going to St. Louis, I was able to buy a couple 100-acre farm out in Washington, Missouri. And the farm was kind of an open place. Larry Patey and the groups, Eddie Stanowski, and there was a group of guys that all liked to hunt. I was never a hunter. They like to hunt deer. They like to hunt quail. Some guys like to ride motorcycles. I told you before, I rode a motorcycle or a scooter when I was 14, and I still have a motorcycle today. So I had motorcycles, I had horses, I had cows, and it was kind of an open invitation for anybody that wanted to come out, if they wanted to come out and go hunting. Or I had 5 lakes and some creeks, and guys could fish in the lakes and ride horses or whatever they wanted to do. So at the end of every season, in the middle of the season, I would have a hay ride, usually around Halloween, sometime like that. And then at the end of the season, we would have a pig roast. My neighbor next to me was his name was Winston Brunge, great family, and we got to know him really well. They babysat our kids and my girls, and we became really close friends. And he raised hogs. He had a hog house and raised hogs. So we would have a pig roast on the May 24th weekend at my farm. And we'd have the motorcycles and the horses and all the stuff around to just for a day. And all the guys would come out. And when you came out, I mentioned before that I never drank much. I've never had a beer. The things that I would drink would be a woman's drink, maybe a White Russian or something that tastes like a milkshake. But I never got involved with drinking. But at this particular time, we had a horse trough that the guys would come out, and they'd bring a bottle of something, whiskey or vodka or something, dump it in there with a bunch of ice, and then some juice. So it would be like some type of a cocktail thing. And we'd spend the day just having fun. Bobby was always riding horses. Bobby was a cowboy. We had a few cowboys on our team that year. John Davidson, Bobby Gassoff, Glenn Sather was there. Floyd Thompson was a cowboy. And on days off, we used to go over to a guy named Cletus Holling's ranch and ride cutting horses. And that was our fun for the day. So Bobby was always with the horses. I never saw him do much with the motorcycles. So this was now into the afternoon, and Bobby was trying to start one of the motorcycles. And I went over to him. It was probably 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And I went over to him. I remember going over to him and saying, "Listen, I don't know how much you've been drinking. We've been here all day. Don't fool around with these motorcycles. Go do something else. We're going to eat pretty soon. Leave the bike alone." So now I'll go back to that season. So now I'm playing with Bobby. Bobby becomes a very good friend. His wife becomes really close friends with my wife, his wife, Diane. She's pregnant at the end of the season. And we were going out for dinner together, and we became really close. In the playoffs, we were playing Minnesota in the playoffs. And we went into Minnesota. I'm trying to think, it had to be the 5th game was in Minnesota. And we had to win it. And the series, when we left Minnesota had won the game there. And now it was 3-2 in the series for them. All they had to do was win one more game. So they were coming back into St. Louis for game 6. And then we would play game 7 back in Minnesota. When I was going down the ramp at the back of the building, there was always a pile of kids before and after the game getting autographs and all that stuff. And I always liked to sign autographs for the kids, but we were going in to play a game, and you kind of just walk through and sign the autographs and say, "Listen, I'll be out after the game, and I'll stand and sign autographs as long as you want when the game's over." Over in the corner, there was a kid standing, and he said to me, "Do you know where you're going to spend eternity?" And I said, "Hey, I got a hockey game to play. I'm not thinking about anything like that." and we left. We played the game in St. Louis. We won. So now it's 3-3 in the series. We go back to Minnesota and we won the game in overtime in Minnesota, game 7, to put us in the next round. We flew back to St. Louis. This was one of the great moments of my career in St. Louis. We went back to St. Louis, got into St. Louis about probably 4 in the morning. I mean, it was really early in the morning. When we got back to the airport, there was at least 10,000 people at the airport waiting for the plane and waiting for the guys. And, you know, everybody was cheering and yelling and screaming. Anyhow, we ended up losing the next round to Boston. And then we were at this party. So now I go back and somebody says we need some more pop and stuff for supper. And things are going on. And all of a sudden I get a phone call. Somebody comes out and most of the people that I knew were at this party. The only thing that was going to happen would be somebody from back home, maybe my mom and dad or somebody like that would be calling because they wouldn't know about the party. And the moment they were trying to track me down with this phone, I had a feeling down deep that something had happened. I got on the phone and it was the Missouri State Troopers. And the guy said, do you know a Bobby Gassoff? And all I could say was, is he okay? Is he okay? And he said, there's been an accident. And I remember handing the phone to somebody else and I walked away and I said, something really terrible has happened. He wouldn't tell us. And right then that guy's face that said, do you know where you're going to spend eternity, was right in front of me. And I said, I don't know. I said, if something happened to Bobby, he's the toughest guy that I ever played in the NHL. I've jumped in fights in brawls where there's only three referees and 20 guys on each team to help the guy on the other team because Bobby was going to kill him if nobody got in there and helped him. And then I found out 5 minutes later that he was gone. And it could have been me just as easy as him. He had gone on the bike. He had started that bike and gone with Bruce Affleck and a couple of younger boys that had small bikes. I had an easement across my property that was half a mile. They'd gone to the end of the property and there was the little boys had stopped. They didn't have helmets on. They were, no helmets, shorts, t-shirt. And the kids said, we're not allowed to go out on the road. And Bobby came up and said, oh, we'll just go up the road and come back. So they went up the road and came back. And when they were coming back, somehow it was one of those big hills in Missouri. And somehow Bobby was on the wrong side of the road. And his wife was 7 months pregnant. It was a sad, sad moment for me.
Yeah. No,
but it was the start. It was the start of me saying, there must be something more to life than what I know. And it was tough.
Yeah, I know this is a hard thing to talk about, and I've talked to Bruce Affleck. Actually, he was one of the first people I really interviewed, and he had a hard time going through that. Bobby, I can't believe, or Bobby, Larry, we've actually gone through an hour and 20 minutes already. We're gonna have to. I want to talk more, but man, nobody's gonna watch it when we do a 4-hour interview. So what we'll do now is we'll say thank you very, very much for this for today, and we'll set up in a week or so, and we'll do another one with you, and we'll catch up where we're at. But Garry, I'm sitting here just with goosebumps today. I don't know what to say to you, but thank you, sir. Just in the last couple of days, the quick little friendship that we've created, I really appreciate you opening up like that. It's really, you guys were my heroes, and you're showing me why, and I appreciate that from you.
Well, hockey has been so great to me. St. Louis was so great to me. I love my time in St. Louis. I married my wife. She's not from St. Louis. She was actually lived in the army camp when I was 15 years old. We've been married for 44 years. I've still got really good friends in St. Louis. The Bobby story leads up to the fact of how I ended up leaving St. Louis and following my Christian faith and finding my Christian faith. But I owe St. Louis a lot more than they owe me.
Oh no, and like I said, I want to continue this, but at an hour and a half, we're at the edge of the we're at the edge of people's attention.
Okay.
So we
Well,
will.
I just want to say for the fans my age, you really brought the game to life. It was a new team. It is really great to have a superstar, and I'm very honored to speak to you. God bless, man.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
I have one last quick question for you. I can't get away without asking this one because I know I'll get beat up if I don't. What did the team winning the cup in 19 mean to you?
Well, St. Louis has always been, when I walked out of that dressing room the first time in the old arena and they were playing the Saints Go Marching In, the whole crowd was standing. You couldn't hear yourself think. You had goosebumps all over your body. I mean, if you didn't get pumped up when that happened, the organ was playing, and it was the most amazing place to play. The fans have followed the team, win, lose, or draw, for years and years and years. And for me, it was for all those fans, and now the fans' kids and grandkids, and stories that the grandfathers and the older people were telling them about the older Blues and us guys, and where the team came from 1967 and started with Mr. Solomon and the family and the whole deal, Bobby and Bark and Noel Picard and Red Berenson. And it was something that town, that group of fans, that organization, that was their special time.
A lot of the guys that I've talked to, a few of them have felt like that cup was theirs too. Did you
Right.
get that feeling a little bit?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, like I said, like Garry, I thank you so much. This is the emotion that you have sent through us is great. I promise everyone, we will pick this up next week. We'll get with Garry next week. We'll do another interview if he can. This is absolutely fantastic. Garry, thank you so much for being a guest on the Bluenote Fan Report. Your stories are amazing, and we will so want to hear more of them.
Well, I appreciate it. Like I say, St. Louis is very special to me. So anytime you want to talk, give me a call.
We'll set it up for next week. So
Okay.
everyone, and I did it again. This is Guy and Brock saying we're bleeding blue with you. And we certainly cannot wait to get to talk with Garry Unger again on the next Bluenote Fan Report. Aloha!